So, good afternoon, good morning, bonjour, everyone, and welcome to the EU-Canada Week on ICT Standardisation. My name is Brendan Rowan, and I am the part of the coordination team of the INSTAR project, which is behind the organisation of today, of course, with many partners, including the Digital Governance Council, Sensenelec, ETSI, and also the Commission itself. We look forward to really interesting discussions throughout the day, but before I begin, just a small piece on housekeeping. So the webinar is recorded, so please be mindful of that. If you have any questions, and we encourage you to have questions throughout today, please use the Q&A function. And finally, if you can also, it's always helpful to know who's in the room. If you can change your name to also include your organization, that will help us when we're bringing up the discussion. Now, a small piece on INSTAR, just for me to explain what it is. So if Margarita, you can go to the next slide. So INSTAR is a European funded initiative that's been running since 2024. And our main objectives are to really support and facilitate the coordination of partnerships and communities amongst like-minded partners across APAC region and North America. So that includes Japan, Republic of Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Australia, as well as North America, including, of course, today, Canada. We work to identify what are the common vision and priorities in international standards and work with these international partners to cooperate and facilitate that cooperation across actors between the EU and the other areas, that is particularly under the digital partnerships. We look at different areas of technologies. We look at AI, data, cybersecurity and EIDs, Cloud-Edge-IoT, 5G, 6G, and quantum. And we're already working quite closely with partners from across the Republic of Korea. So we work with TTA, from Japan, TTC and JBCE. And then, of course, today we're partnering with the Digital Governance Council, who have been supporting in the coordination of today's session. How we work is that we have, if you go to the next slide, how we work is that we have 6 European task forces made up of around 100 experts. And each of these task forces produces on a regular basis what they call the priorities for international cooperation on standards. And these are a distillation of both technical, policy, and industry-related priorities that we have. And we coordinate and cooperate with our international partners to identify what are the points in common, which we form in these joint picks, and we work on the cooperation actions from there. And today is one of these examples where we can kickstart those type of engagements and opportunities. So the next slide. Just before I hand off, a small point, next upcoming activities after Canada Week, we will be present at JISC in Seoul. So if any of you are there, please do sign up for our sessions on the 5th. And also we have a session on the 6th with the IEEE community. Next slide. So on to EU-Canada Week. So really looking forward to the discussions today. A lot of interest from many different parties in how we can bring together the different communities and actors across both areas, so between the EU and Canada. And we have a huge packed agenda happening over the next 3 days. So today we'll be discussing Cloud-Edge-IoT. We'll be going into some of the details and the opportunities for collaboration there. Tomorrow, we will have the data and data spaces, particularly in that trusted environment and creation of the trusted environments through standards. And then finally, on Thursday, we'll be dealing more on the quantum and also the PQC environment. So I do encourage you all to sign up and join us for the other days as well. And the QR code in the bottom right will lead you to the agenda, but it's also available on our website. And then on to today in detail. So we will have, first of all, the opening of the EU-Canada Week in ICT Standardisation from Mr. Olivier Bringer, from the head of unit within the European Commission at DG Connect for International Affairs and Policy Outreach. And also from the Canadian side, we'll be hearing from Iyad, who's the Director for International Trade Policy at the Innovation, Science and Economic Development of Canada. Then we'll kick off with day one, where my colleague Damir will be picking up, who is the Cloud-Edge-IoT European Task Force lead. And he'll be bringing you through the session where we'll hear from Svetoslav, who's the policy officer for the Internet, Connected Mobility and Energy and IoT. Then we'll be hearing from the chair of the ETSI MEC committee from Dario Sabella. And then we'll be hearing from Keith, who's the CEO of the Digital Governance Council of Canada. And then later on, we'll go into more of a panel debate and discussion. And the first topic will be related to how large-scale pilots and industry activities can translate from ideas and from R&D into standardization. And then we'll also be looking at the cross-border interoperability and how we can achieve that through these relationships early on and later on in the journey as well. So without further from my side, I wish you all an excellent session, and we will hearing first from Olivier and then from Iyad.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I really want to welcome all the participants to this EU-Canada Digital Partnership Week on ICT standardization. I want to thank INSTAR and the Digital Governance Council of Canada, as well as our delegation and all the partners who have been involved for the organization of this week. I also want to thank my friend Iyad Daka from IZ for the cooperation in preparing the event and to open the event together with me. As you all know, and as the title says it, the week is taking place in the context of the EU-Canada Digital Partnership, which is our main vehicle for cooperation with Canada on digital and digital policies. And we are implementing this partnership together with IZ on the Canadian side. So I'm very happy by the agenda that was mentioned by Brendan. I think we are going to discuss this week very interesting topic, IoT, data, quantum, which are very important for our cooperation inside the partnership. IoT, if I can give my personal take, is really an opportunity to open respective markets by using common standards that are internationally recognized, so standards that have been developed by ISO ISC, but also ETSI standards that have been adopted internationally. And I think this is really an opportunity to help our SMEs on the EU and the Canadian side to bring their innovations beyond their borders. The second topic on data is very important. It's very important to have common or aligned standards to facilitate data free flow with trust between Canada and the EU. And I think this would be a very good basis to facilitate also interoperability of our respective data spaces, which I think is a very interesting area of cooperation in the partnership. And finally, quantum, very important technology. I mean, we have been cooperating with Canada for a long time on research and innovation in quantum, and now I think is also the time. We'll continue, of course, to have a lot of cooperation on research and innovation, but it's also the time to think at supporting also concrete products and services and the Canadian and the competitiveness, of our respective industries is very important because we need to maintain our technology sovereignty in this area, and we need to reduce dependencies on foreign technologies, and that on the EU side we want to do with our partners like Canada. So beyond these three topics, I wanted also to say that the cooperation between the EU and Canada in the standardization area is quite strong. For example, we have the Standards Council of Canada that is a so-called companion standardization body in one of our European standardization organizations, CEN. So that's the highest level of cooperation for a partner country. We have also many Canadian stakeholders that are very active in ETSI, or another European standardization organization, and especially in one of the fields we'll be discussing this week in the field of quantum. So we are really looking forward to hearing ideas and concrete suggestions to advance our cooperation with Canada in these very important standardization areas. And that being said, I wanted to put the discussion this week and the work of the digital partnership itself in the broader context of our international strategy. So you may know that the EU has issued an international strategy just before the summer, back in June. In this strategy, we are trying to achieve a number of objectives. One of them is to really increase our competitiveness, and doing so also the competitiveness of our partners by working together on research and innovation, by working together on supply chain resilience, and by working together like today on topics such as standardization. A very important objective also of our international engagement is to promote a high level of security for the EU and for its partners. And I think this is something that I hope is going also to feature in the discussions during this week. And finally, third objective is to shape global digital governance. So something we are doing in the field of standardization, in international standardization bodies, but also in the multilateral area, in the UN, G7, G20. Canada has the G7 presidency, of course, this year, and we are cooperating very closely with Canada and other like-minded partners in the area of global digital governance. So how we are doing it is that we want to deepen the cooperation with our existing partners, like we are doing today, for example, with Canada. We want to broaden also the cooperation that we have with partners globally. So, for example, we probably open new partnerships in other regions of the world. And we think there is an interest to connect our different partnerships on issues of common interest. And one of these issues is standardization. So I could very well imagine also looking at your geographic scope in INSTAR, that next time we organize such an event, we also invite partners like Singapore or Korea or Japan to also take part. In general, I think standardization is very important in the implementation of our international strategy. And we see it really as a tool to strengthen our competitiveness, to foster digital and tech sovereignty, and to promote our fundamental values and interests. Last point I wanted to make after giving this broader perspective on our international strategy is to focus a bit on what we do in the EU. And in the EU, I think like in other places in the world, and probably in Canada, we see that there are a number of challenges around standardization. One of them is how can we be more influential in international standardization? Another one is how can we train the next generation of experts in standardization? So how can we develop the right training schemes and develop the skills for standardization experts? And third, how can we incentivize our most innovative companies, SME startups, but also researchers to take part in standardization? So to address these challenges, among others, we are currently revising our regulatory framework on standardization. And we have launched a public consultation at the end of last month that will run until the end of the year. To get input from our stakeholders. So I really encourage you. I mean, we are looking for input from European stakeholders, but also international companies and also from our international partners. So feel free to contribute to this exercise. And we hope to be able to have a first proposal of a new framework before the summer of next year. And really the objective that we'll try to achieve is to make our European standardization system more agile and more inclusive, so responding to the challenges I was mentioning and reinforcing our global position in international standardization. And all of that, clearly, we want to do together with our like-minded partners. And that's why I think it's very important that we have the discussion that we are having today and in the next 2 days. So with that, I will happily pass the floor to Iyad to give the perspective on the Canadian side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for these very thoughtful remarks. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and partners from across Canada and the EU. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today for this important workshop. I want to thank the organizers, INSTAR and the Digital Governance Council in particular. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to our EU colleagues for helping to make this workshop and these series of workshops a reality. I'm especially pleased to echo my good friend and colleague Olivier's comments. It's a pleasure to be here with you to open this important week of events. Olivier, thank you to you and your team, and thank you to the thoughtful remarks and for everyone's efforts for gathering us here today. So as has already been said, my name is Iyad Daka. I'm the Director of International and Trade Policy at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. For those of you who maybe don't know, ISED's role is very large. It's what the closest that could be considered to a supra ministry in the Canadian system. Our mandate is very broad, but a key element of that mandate is to help develop the policies, the strategies, the partnerships internationally to advance Canadian interests in the digital domain, which are many and varied. Canada and the EU, of course, have long enjoyed a deep and what I would say multifaceted relationship, a relationship that's grounded in shared values, democratic principles, commitments, mutual commitments to open, inclusive, sustainable societies. And if you think about today's digital age, these foundations are perhaps more relevant than they've ever been. As we collectively try to navigate an increasingly complex global digital landscape, the collaboration that we are advancing today between our respective jurisdictions must continue to evolve, must continue to try and meet new challenges head on and embrace the opportunities that innovation in the digital space bring about. Of course, we know that digital technologies are transforming every sector of our economies, from AI and cybersecurity to data governance and digital trade. The pace of change is extremely rapid and demands a coordinated, forward-looking policy response, especially amongst like-minded partners. Canada and the EU are in this respect uniquely positioned to lead in this space, not only because of the technological strengths that we respectively have, but also because of our shared vision for a digital economy that is human-centric, trustworthy, and resilient. So our collaboration is in fact already producing meaningful results. The Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement provides a very strong foundation for digital trade and innovation. Joint work on data adequacy, cybersecurity cooperation, and digital standards is helping to align the regulatory approaches and foster interoperability. And through multilateral forums such as the G7, the OECD, the Global Partnership on AI, Canada and the EU continue to champion responsible digital innovation on the world stage. This particular partnership, the Canada-EU digital cooperation in the digital cooperation domain, has actually come a very long way since October 2016, when our government signed the Strategic Partnership Agreement. This would be the overarching strategic framework that guides our collaboration. Of course, the SPA has many different areas of collaboration, spanning a wide range of issues such as defense, economic collaboration, environmental collaboration, science, tech, and innovation. But building on that momentum, there was a determination that there had to be a much more focused aspect for digital collaboration under the SPA. And hence, the Canada-EU Digital Partnership was born and effectively launched in February 2024, which marked a significant milestone in our shared commitment to deepen cooperation on digital issues. The digital partnership provides a dedicated framework to address both emerging technologies and those already embedded in our daily lives, where international cooperation between like-minded partners is more important than ever. Most recently, at the 2025 Canada-EU Leaders Summit, our leaders reaffirmed and launched what we termed the new Canada-EU Strategic Partnership of the Future. Amongst its many forward-looking commitments was a renewed emphasis on collaboration under the digital partnership, in anticipation of the inaugural ministerial level Digital Partnership Council meeting later this year. In an era marked by shifting geopolitical dynamics, as many of you will know, it's crucial for Canada to collaborate with trusted and like-minded partners such as the EU. This week is an opportunity to continue exchanging on our respective domestic policy approaches and to identify potential areas of synergy. Topics being discussed over the next few days on ICT standardization, data, and quantum may be technical in nature and perhaps not the first issues that come to mind for many of our citizens on a day-to-day basis, but they are in fact extremely important elements for the long-term implementation of our policy objectives. So allow me to close by reconfirming Canada's valued relationship with EU partners. Allow me to reconfirm our valued relationships with our multi-stakeholder partners, many of which are will be here today and will be here throughout the week. By working together, Canada, the EU, and its partners can shape global norms, drive inclusive growth, and build a digital future that reflects our shared values and serves our citizens. Today's discussions are an important step in that journey. Thank you once again for your leadership, engagement, and commitment to this important work, partners. I look forward to the conversations ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Iyad, and thank you so much, Olivier, for giving us the context of why we're all meeting today and discussing what it is that we're discussing over the next few days as well. And looking forward to picking on what you were mentioning as the opportunities that we can form from sessions like today. So with that closed in terms of the opening closed, forgive me for the language, I'll hand over to Damir, who's going to be leading us on the Cloud-Edge-IoT session today. Damir, over to you.
Thank you, Brendan. Welcome again. Thank you for joining this session. I see that we have already quite, let's say, decent audience, and I know a lot of you in the audience, which is very good. I think it's a great, I would say, wealth for us to have such an audience and also speakers. Let's maybe go immediately to the next slide just to introduce you what will be the structure of the agenda for today. So we will have three, let's say, parts of the agenda. First, we will start with the three interventions from the European Commission, so from Svet Mihailov, from Chairman of the ETSI MEC Committee, Dario Sabella, and then from Kit Jansa from the Digital Governance Council of Canada to also, so to say, set the scene for the overall session. And then on the next slide, we will have two roundtables and a panel that we will go, I would say, more into the, so to say, flesh and bones of the discussion, having presentations from the three European initiatives, CI Sphere, OCI, and Copilot, that are dealing with the topics of the Cloud-Edge-IoT. And then two interventions from our Canadian friends, from Curtis McBride, CEO of MyoVision, and Marwa Turabi from the Iristel, and then have a short discussion about what we heard there. And then the final panel will be about cross-border interoperability, when we will have Cecile and Antonio as the experts working on this together with Dario and Kit, and then have, let's say, the open discussion before we close the whole event and make some, hopefully, findings that we can share for the further work among all of us together. Let's go to the next slide just to give you a bit of an idea where INSTAR, in a sense of Cloud Edge and IoT domains, is coming from. So you can see the list of the topics that were identified as, I would say, quite important from the European task force. So we have 20 experts that worked together, taking into account all the relevant EU policies, projects, initiatives, including, of course, also digital partnerships. And they came out with this, let's say, list that we are, of course, regularly updating, as Brendan mentioned. We already had 2 iterations, and we are preparing the 3rd one. And this is for us, let's say, a sort of the basis for open discussion with international partners. We're already doing this with Korea and Japan. And if you remember the GISC event that Brendan mentioned at the beginning, we hope to basically present sort of the joint priorities that we will come out with TTA from Korea. And then on the next slide, and that will be the last slide before we go into the further interventions, this is just to show you how, what are the sort of the phases, how INSTAR works with international partners to come to the joint priorities. We try to kind of simplify it just to show you in a very, very, I would say, simple way how we are doing. So we first approach, of course, international partners, discuss the opportunities of collaboration, and then, of course, if possible, sign MOU. But even with or without MOU, the key thing is to find the willingness to collaborate, and then priorities, which then we exchange, like the ones I showed on a previous slide. We receive the feedback from the international partners, and then we discuss joint priorities, which basically then we discuss in a form of the concrete actions how this can be in a way jointly worked on and promoted in international standardization development organizations. And of course, on top of it, we have joint events, workshops, webinars, including like the one we have today. I think now we can start with individual interventions, and let's start with the Svet. So Svet, please, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Damir. Good afternoon. So yeah, my name is Svet Mihailov. I'm a policy officer, as Damir already said, in the Intelligent Connected Mobility, Energy and IoT in the European Commission. And I'll talk a bit how we address standardization in the CEI area of the standards, our different approaches, and especially focusing on international cooperation, not necessarily with Canada, where I don't have so much experience working with, but in general, the international approach, which of course can show ways where we can collaborate together with Canada as well. So maybe if we go on the next slide. So what are the different avenues that we're exploring when we're approaching CEI and standardization? So we fund European projects, for example, that are working in this area. They can contribute to standardization and also test it, deploy it, etc. We also fund directly and support standardization work via different tools such as studies, action grants, etc. We are working directly by participating into the work of European international standardization organizations, or steering them, or just collaborating. We have the rolling plan for ICT standardization, and then the annual Union Work Program, where we make our plans of what should be standardized, etc., what are the activities that are happening, and so on. I have slides on all these things coming after. And then we also focus, of course, there is typical standardization work, and there is, of course, the open source that is de facto standardization, where we can move a lot faster, we can be more open, we can have collaboration and participation. So, of course, we're focusing very much on it. And, of course, collaborating there with some important players, such as Eclipse Foundation, Linux Foundation, etc. And then we have had, using these tools, we have a number of successes. So it was on the previous slide too. Such as the SAREF ontology, for example, that we developed with HCM 1M2M and became international standard 1M2M. Of course, ITUT is transposing these standards. Sense and Elect played a very important role in creating, especially the energy part of it. Then we have the minimum interoperability mechanism, which is used mainly in smart cities, but from there it spread also, which became an ITUT standard specifications, NGS-IOD, and so on. I mean, these are just examples. Of course, there are many more. Then we can go now to the next slide. And so we're going one by one to the things that I mentioned. If you look at projects, we have several programs focusing on different stages of the development of technologies. So when we look at the initial stage, research and development and innovation, so piloting, then we have Horizon Europe, our program. And there within it, we have a number of projects that are dealing with IoT, Edge, Cloud, and so on. Some notable are clusters, so several projects together on Meta OS. So this is kind of the operating system that is managing the complexity of the edge computing and machine learning, the spread distributed machine learning. Swarm behavior, again, in an edge environment, that's another cluster of projects, 5 of them. The data space, this will be discussed tomorrow, but we have it also. The preparation for the energy one is within Horizon Europe. We have large-scale piloting of Edge AIoT in the energy sector. So the first one were more smaller in many sectors, where this is bigger in one sector. We have follow-up actions from the Meta OS and Swarms in the piloting emerging smart IoT platforms in decentralized intelligence. We are going into the digital area, into the energy area, sorry. We're going into the so-called digital spine of the energy system, so kind of a completely a digital layer that will be overlaying the complete digital system, not only encompassing the grid, but also all the other spread assets, such as renewables and charging and so on. And then we have many others which are covering digital twins and other areas. And in these projects, at least in my experience in the past, we have had a number of participants from outside of the EU. Most notably, when we look outside, I mean really the kind of Canada-like outside, not very next door neighbors. So like South Korea, Japan, we had Brazil and so on in different projects. And this was in a number of projects. It's combined, it's a joint program that each of the two parties funds their participants and so on, but it's a one common project. So. And then this is the research and development. Then we go into more deployment, where we have two other programs. Now it's still the previous slides. So we have the Digital Europe program, where we have, for example, the deployment of the common European data spaces, preparation and deployment only for the energy was in Horizon Europe, the preparation. And then we have the Connected Europe facility, where we have the operational digital platform, which is again similar system, IoT-based system with Edge Computing and so on being deployed. So these two are funding deployment. So now we can go to the next slide. The other way, another avenue was, as mentioned, working together with European international standards organizations. They're different of them. So if you look at the European ones, ETSI is the one that is dealing with ICT standardization in Europe, and together we want end-to-end. We're working with different technical committees there, Smart M2M, CMEC, and now the combined TC data. And with them, we developed the SARAF ontology together and funded and developed together extensions, new versions of it, adaptations, digital twins, adaptations to the edge, AI, and so on. And then the HSIoT, as was mentioned. Sense and the Lake, again, many activities, just to mention that there were very big contributors to SARAF for NS, so for the energy area. And then, for example, the national ones, which are part of Sense and the Lake, with Dean, we developed together a codified standards in the smart city and smart lamppost area, and so on. So if we look at then the international organizations, we are participating. So I personally, for example, are participating for the IoT and Edge, etc. Participating in the work of IoT G20, where, for example, the minimum interoperability mechanism was coded, and then that we developed in our projects. And then the same with ISO IEC SC41. So both these are with the respective organizations, the ones dealing with Internet of Things, and of course covering now Edge Computing, etc. And there at SC41, we have had a number of initiatives. So first of all, we have covered some standards and introduced and participated in the work, like architectures for IoT Edge Cloud, digital twin use cases, reference architectures, and so on. You'll see some mentions, some standards. We brought all these projects that I was mentioning before, the clusters on edge, swarms, etc., did data spaces. We organized workshops co-located with the plenary events of SC41. And also these projects have combined their efforts and are representing the Commission in the work on, for example, the architecture considerations and some reference architecture and so on. They're representing the Commission, combining efforts. And then we can go to the next slide. We also, as mentioned, directly fund standardization work via studies, action grants, and other tools. This is outside of the projects that I mentioned, which are focusing on development technology, but combined with standardization. These are purely funding for standardization tools. So studies, for example, we had a couple of studies in which we developed the initial version of the SARAF ontology and then extended it to the whole smart grid for demand-side flexibility. And the action grants, we also, again, these are just examples. Of course, we've done it for many other things, but this is within this area of CEI, some examples of what we have done. And so for action grants, in a similar way, we developed new versions, well, funded new versions and extensions in different areas. When I say extension, it means like energy, mobility, wearables, health, and so on, water, etc. And then develop an ES standard in another action grant, digital twin adaptation. And then also there is an ongoing action grant to look at the Edge and IoT to see how this can collaborate and what are the points, etc. So this is ongoing, they're producing reports. Next slide. Then, yeah, where we encode our planning, our roadmap, so to say, what we do in the standardization, the state of the art, the state of the status, and then the roadmap. These are and this applies to all the other areas, not only to CEI, but CEI is part of it. So these are the rolling plan and the annual union work program. In the rolling plan, this is something that is updated annually. the chapters where IoT is covered to a great extent are, of course, the IoT chapter itself, but then cloud and edge computing, again, the topic of today, smart grid, smart cities, etc. If you look at the IoT chapter, this is covering a lot of areas: interoperability, cloud, edge computing, edge swarm computing, and so on, all these kind of different topics that we mentioned. You can see them. There is the multi-stakeholder platform for ICT standardization, which is the one that is helping us work on this rolling plan, and where we can also consult with different SDOs, member states, industry associations, society, consortia, etc. And then the annual work program on European standardization, where we identify standardization priorities. And there, for example, we identify where action grants are needed, where harmonized standards are needed, etc. Let's go to the next slide. And then lastly, this is practice the focus on open source, as I mentioned. This is a new way of doing it. This is a way of involving everybody, standardizing faster, iterating faster, etc. So that's why we're looking at it. And our projects are mandated to deliver open source. For years and years, this is what they've been part of our project. They have to deliver an open source solution, not closed, not hidden somewhere. And why we're doing it, to boost autonomy, innovation, and competitiveness. It was also already mentioned by Olivier that we are aiming at increasing our competitiveness. We want to reduce our dependency on a few non-EU technological providers, and then, of course, becoming more sovereign, to support interoperability, to avoid the vendor lock-in, especially when they're big players locking the customers, foster inclusive knowledge society. This lowers cost, improves efficiency and security, enhances transparency. And all these technologies that we develop this way are aligned with our European values. Then, of course, within this activity, we cooperate with the Linux Foundation and the Eclipse Foundation. If you look in projects, for example, we have again, this is just an example, Eclipse Foundation is participating, say, in the NEMO project. This is one of this Meta OS for the Edge projects. And of course, it's working throughout the cluster for all the other projects to make a unified open source stack. And when we look at other initiatives, we're working, for example, with the Linux Foundation Energy as on a policy level. And of course, the big question when we're working with open source is to assure sustainability, which means that beyond the end of the project, because these are projects with fixed length, how do we make sure that this lasts and blossoms afterwards? This is the big burden. And of course, this is the last slide, but something that I haven't mentioned explicitly, but I think it's becoming also clear that we're working with stakeholders such as the AUTI that was mentioned, etc., in order to address this. They have very profound work in one of their working groups, for example, on standardization. So we're working very closely with them and other similar organizations in order to address the standardization issue, and especially this international cooperation part of it. So these are again, just I sketched some of the areas that we use, some of the approaches that we use to standardize things in this area and to evolve international cooperation. So I think these are places where we can cooperate also with Canada. Maybe we can think of also having common participation in projects where each of the sites funds its participation. We should cooperate in this international organization where, of course, we have some other regions that are better represented. So, of course, if we want to defend our like-minded values, etc., then okay, probably we should join forces and so on. And yeah, open source, of course, is more than welcome to cooperate there as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Svet. I think this, especially what you mentioned at the end, is also part of the activities of INSTAR. That means finding potential points with like-minded countries in standardization in certain areas, including what we discussed today, Cloud-Edge-IoT, and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will be data and quantum as an examples. Now let's move on to Dario, who will talk to us about ETSI, let's say, work related to the Edge IoT deployments in his role as a chairman of ETSI MEC. So Dario, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you everybody for having me in this event. And I'm going to present on behalf of Etsy Mac as a chairman of this standard group, and also to give you some updates related as well to some Edge IoT projects. Actually, the group I'm representing, which is MEC, the acronym MEC stands for Multi-Access Edge Computing. It's a big group, I would say the biggest ISG in Etsy, counting more than 200 members and participants. And this was born with the aim to, starting from the definition of the virtualization, the virtualized infrastructure, to address the need of a Mac application development community. So actually the goal is to define some standards that are important for application level, not just for, let's say, virtualizing the infrastructure, but addressing the needs of application developers. And particularly, this is what we have done so far in Mac. This is a sort of tagline that you can see in the top left corner of the slide. Mac offers to application developers and content providers cloud computing capabilities and an IT service environment at the edge of the network. So why I'm reading this sentence? Because it's quite a stable definition of what we have done in the group, establishing the foundation of edge computing, but also addressing the needs of application developers, and not just only defining a sort of intermediate point where we can have a best location and a more, let's say, a smaller delay, round trip time, which is of course an advantage, but also the applications at the edge can consume locally some services, some APIs that you can see here in the right top corner figure, where there is a Mac application which is also connected with the Mac platform via some RESTful APIs can connect to Mac services which are available at the edge. And the approach is to build this architecture on top of the NEC NFV framework for an alignment with NFV deployments, but keep also a sort of because if on one hand Mac can be deployed in 5G networks, and then I can tell you that Mac in phase 3 was totally aligned with the 3GPP release 18, and now we are moving to alignment with release 19. But on the other hand, the Mac standard is access agnostic. So you can deploy Mac also in Wi-Fi, in fixed networks with satellites. So really, it's a cloud computing at the edge, access agnostic. So that's why the acronym MAC stands for multi-access edge computing. Okay, so and this is actually the concept that I would like to deliver you this slide. And very quickly, you can recognize that Mac can serve different market segments in several use cases. For that reason, I want to be very clear. We are not the experts on all the verticals. That would be too much. Okay? We cannot pretend to be the experts on all the market domains. Vice versa, we are the experts on the cloud, we are the experts of the edge, and we need a dialogue, a discussion, an interaction with those stakeholders coming from those experts in the different segments and market domains. Okay, so actually you see how huge is the list of possible vertical segments, from automotive to industrial automation, VR, AR, XR in general, video streaming, gaming, e-health, smart cities. In all those market segments, Edge can provide a benefit which is different, not just only shortening the path between cloud application and server application, because of course they have better performance, smaller latency, and so on and so forth, but you can provide also locally some information, some APIs that can be consumed locally, and the specific API information that matters depends on the specific vertical. That's the point where we discuss with those. And then, of course, I was about to say that we need a discussion with the experts from different market segments. That's why we designed a sort of edge discovery events. For example, we met experts from the drone, vertical, and spatial computing and gaming, also cybersecurity, and any other kind of verticals. So actually, this is actually the architecture. I will not go into details, but just to give you the feeling that provided that you have this kind of architecture built in the standard, you see that the added value of this infrastructure is not just only real estate, let's say, right? That which is good because we provide a better environment in terms of latency. But we have another value. The value is given by the APIs that can be consumed at the edge by the application. Of course, there is no limit to the number of APIs that you can define. And we are not pretending to standardize each and every possible API, which is infinite by design. The point is, we are just standardizing those APIs which are needed by the industry to be standardized. And this was actually the input coming from companies. So what is the other important asset is that we are addressing the needs of application developers. We want really to build a framework where they can use and consume APIs, and we are using RESTful as a universally accepted language for HTTP commands, and APIs can be used by everyone, right? So the other important aspect I would like to highlight here in this slide is that, of course, we can also provide a framework where you can also add your own API, provided that this is compliant with the basic principle of a design of a RESTful-based HTTP APIs. And this is actually a mechanism that allows you to add your own API to the system. This will be recognized by the service registry in the Mac platform, and then the Mac platform will advertise to all other applications about the existence of this additional service at the edge. This is a very powerful message I want to give you, because this is opening up the market to third-party applications and APIs, even not standardized per se, because the basic mechanism of service exposure, incremental service exposure, is already native in our edge platform in the Mac system. Okay? So, of course, I have a lot of things that I can show you in terms of what we have done in all those, I would say, more than 10 years, about 10 years, in each and every phase, lasting 3 years. And actually, we are almost, let's say, at the middle of phase 4 in Mac. And there are also plans that we will show you for evolving about the future. But I would like also to give you a flavor that we have also other additional activities related to Mac, not only just the specifications, but also addressing the needs of application developers, like software tools, Mac sandbox, competitions like hackathons, and collaboration with open source projects. In particular, I would like to focus on the IoT. IoT is a great collaboration that we are having, for example, with 1M2M, Smart M2M, because at the end, as I said, we want to consume data where this is produced locally at the edge. And IoT devices, sensors, and all the constrained devices that you can find at the edge or at the far edge are very important for us. So a joint edge IoT deployment is being studied in a project, how to deploy at CMAC and 1M2M standardized equipment. So we have studied that in a white paper, and I will, let's say, not go over details, but of course I will give you all the information about that. And the important thing is that we have established a task force started this February, lasting for 3 years, starting from this white paper that I mentioned, really targeting on how to deploy Edge IoT. And there are a lot of goals, not just investigating the standards and providing standardization and recommendation, but also practical implementation guidelines, proof of concept, reference software for developers deployable at the Edge IoT systems in Mac environments, and also hackathons. So actually, this is a very important project for us as a joint activity between ETSIMEC and 1 and 2M in the framework of exposing services and data at the edge. And there are a lot of phases of this very ambitious and successful project, which is already started and very well organized. Well, maybe there are other publications. I don't have time also to show you, but there is also a plan for the MEC for the future to move towards 6G. We're progressing with the status of the specifications, but really targeting on how can be the MEC standardization in the future, considering the next wave of communication systems. And last but not the least, I would like to give you just a pointer about one of the activities, which is a practical activity in this esteemed task force, which is a hackathon, Edge IoT hackathon for developing, challenging and encouraging developers to develop a prototype of a Mac and 1 and 2M application exploiting this kind of implementations, considering available 1 and 2M and Mac configuration. And with that, I concluded my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dario. I think what you mentioned is quite interesting, especially links with other domains, so 5G, 6G, and possible, let's say, transition to the new areas. Because, for example, in INSTAR, we have besides Cloud-Edge-IoT also 5G, 6G stream. And then, of course, through hackathon and through joint initiatives like with 1 and 2M, I think this opens opportunity also to consider what can be done with colleagues from Canada as well in the future. And now I hand over to Keith from the Digital Governance Council of Canada. I think this, what Dario mentioned, will be a good leeway to Keith's presentation, which I think will be also very interesting and open quite interesting questions for further discussion. So Keith, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. So good morning, good afternoon from Canada, and thank you for the opportunity to share some insights on how we're approaching the implementation of Cloud-Edge-IoT standards in Canada and how these experiences might inform broader international reflection. The Cloud-Edge-IoT continuum represents more than a stack of technologies. It's a flow of data and control, from connected devices and sensors to edge systems that process data closer to where it's generated, and to the cloud environments that enable large-scale computation, analytics, and increasingly AI-driven decision-making. This continuum is critical to everything from smart manufacturing to energy management, agriculture, and transportation, just to name a few. Yet, as we've seen in Canada, the main challenge isn't the absence of standards, it's the fragmentation of them. At each layer, technical standards are largely operating in isolation. IoT standards emphasize connectivity, how devices and sensors communicate. Edge standards focus on performance, latency, and local processing. And cloud standards prioritize data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity. Each of these standards is valid and important in its own context, but without governance and coordination across the three layers, or even within a single layer, interoperability breaks down. And it doesn't break down because of technical incompatibility alone. It often breaks down because of differences in governance, interpretation, and implementation. So we can see this clearly in several Canadian sectors that may feel familiar to many of you in other areas. In utilities, for example, Hydro-Quebec and ATCO Electric have both implemented IEC 61850 to modernize their substations. The standard's designed for multi-vendor interoperability. Yet in practice, differences in interpretation and tooling led to unexpected integration gaps, even among devices that were fully conformant on paper. So a key insight here is that conformity doesn't guarantee interoperability. In building automation, Canadian companies like Delta Controls Canada were early pioneers of backnet adoption, a standard that's now used worldwide. But because it allows for optional feature sets and because secure connectivity was rolled out unevenly, many so-called BACnet compliant systems still need custom gateways or code to communicate effectively. Again, a standard exists, but consistent implementation often lags behind. And in agriculture, as a third and final example, manufacturers across Western Canada have adopted ISO-BUS, ISO 11783, the open standard for tractor implement communication. Yet even here, proprietary software restrictions from major OEMs continue to limit true interoperability. So the technical framework is open, but the business and governance layers are not. So across all these sectors, as examples, the pattern is remarkably consistent. We achieve consensus on standards, but not consistency in their application. We have conformity, but not always compatibility. In other words, conformity, again, doesn't guarantee interoperability. The remaining gaps often come down to differences in configuration, certification, and most importantly, governance. So from these lessons, two clear priorities emerge for advancing Cloud-Edge-IoT continuum in a way that's both trusted and interoperable. First is the need for governance standards that span the Cloud-Edge-IoT continuum. This isn't another technical specification. It's a framework for coordination, accountability, and trust. Governance standards establish how organizations collaborate, how data ownership, privacy, and sovereignty are respected across layers and across borders. They define the rules of engagement between public and private actors, between sectors, and between national jurisdictions. In practical terms, governance standards help ensure that data moves seamlessly and securely from device to edge to cloud. In Canada, we're beginning to see this thinking reflected in national standards developed by the Digital Governance Standards Institute. The second priority is the development of interoperability profiles and testbeds. Profiles act as a translation layer between global standards and local realities. They take broad international standards, such as the ISO and IEC standards I mentioned earlier, and specify how those standards should be implemented consistently within a regional or national context. In other words, profiles reduce the optionality. They define configuration requirements, specify minimum feature sets, and provide a clear testing reference. They make interoperability predictable. Complementing these profiles are testbeds, controlled environments where entire systems, not just individual devices, can be validated under real-world conditions. These testbeds evaluate interoperability across jurisdictions, across vendors, and across layers of the continuum. So testbeds also serve as living laboratories, not just for testing technology, but for validating governance, data sharing frameworks, and cross-sector collaboration models. They bring together regulators, researchers, and industry to co-create evidence-based standards that can be scaled globally. So that brings us to the broader collaboration between Canada and Europe. Both jurisdictions share common values and similar strategic objectives in creating digital systems that are interoperable, resilient, and trusted. The path forward is cooperative rather than prescriptive. By recognizing our sovereign governance approaches, coordinating profile development, and connecting our testbeds, we can build mutual recognition in how we implement standards. When that confidence exists, technical systems work as intended, certification carries weight across borders, and markets scale more efficiently. So ultimately, interoperability is not just about a technical outcome, it's a function of trust. It depends on how we govern, how we test, and how we collaborate. Oh, apologies. It is built as much through cooperation and governance as through technology. As we continue to strengthen Canada-EU cooperation and standardization, let's consider standards across layers, across borders, and across governance systems. So as we look ahead, let's remember, technical standards define the language of interoperability. Governance gives that language meaning. And so To conclude, the Canadian experience shows that the moving from standardization to true interoperability is as much social and institutional as it is technical. The standards exist. The challenge and the opportunity with many of these international standards lies in how we govern them, implement them, and trust them across the entire continuum. If we can advance governance with technology and collaboration with conformity, we can unlock the full potential of cloud-edge IoT systems, not just within borders, but globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith. I think, at least I would say, for me, the takeaway would be 3 key words. First is fragmentation, then governance, interoperability, and I think this will be the great leeway also to the next 2, let's say, parts of the program that we have, especially the last one, which is about interoperability, and we will be there as well to discuss with other colleagues. We are a bit beyond, let's say, time, but not too much. So I think we can immediately continue with the next part, which is basically the roundtable discussion, the scaling innovation, starting with the 3, let's say, EU-funded initiatives, CI Sphere, OCI, and Copilot, and then continuing with the 2 colleagues from Canada, Curtis and Marwa, to give their perspectives, and then, of course, hopefully have time for a bit of discussion. So I would like to ask speakers to be, let's say, within the given limits for the presentation, so they possibly have a bit of time also for the participants to maybe ask some questions at the end. Let's start with Agat from the CI Sphere project. So floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Agat. I'm the coordination link of the CI Sphere project. So we'll present to you, like at a high level, what is CI Sphere doing and how it's basically is relevant to our topic today. If you can go to the next slide, please. So CI Sphere is a coordination support action that has like 7 partners and supports 2 main large-scale pilots, OCI and Copilot. I think we have the opportunity today to have the coordinators and representative of both large-scale pilots, so you will have more information on those later on. But yeah, basically we are supporting these 2 large-scale pilots, OCI having like 58 partners, 27 scenarios and 8 pilots, and Copilot 45 partners with 4 clusters and 12 use cases. But what do we do within CI Sphere? So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as you know, Europe is on a mission to lead digital innovation by uniting cloud, edge, and IoT technologies through coordinated Horizon Europe initiatives and driving collaboration and active knowledge exchange among all stakeholders. So the role of CI Sphere is basically to strengthen relations between CI stakeholders, so Cloud-Edge-IoT stakeholders, primarily these stakeholders within large-scale pilots, by increasing visibility and uptake of this technology, but also supporting the long-term sustainability of the CI ecosystem across all of Europe. We want to foster, the idea is to foster dynamic collaboration between demand and supply side actors, allowing us to maximizing large-scale pilot projects, ensuring a strong, open, and sovereign Europe CI landscape, basically. So CI Sphere is dedicated to supporting these actors and providing the condition they need to scale and strive in a rapidly evolving digital market. As you know, innovation and research are the heart of our approach, keeping Europe at the forefront of the next generation technology. And by promoting robust policies, strategic partnerships, and targeted investments, CI Sphere focus is to guarantee that Europe's economic security, resilience, and strategic autonomy in the digital area. If you could go to the next slide, please. So as part of our services and model, so this is one of the model that we created within the project. It's called the Hourglass model. As you know, you can present a stack as in a simple linear view of technology, but it's no longer sufficient today to display how like the modern digital ecosystem. So this hourglass model highlights basically how digital ecosystems seamlessly connect in a wide variety of stakeholders and technology. You basically have the platform, like the centralized integrators and platform at the middle that play a pivotal role and is crucial to foster healthy competition and diversity both above and below these functional layers. And it actually captures as well across all of the layers, the different types of stakeholders and capability at each of the layers of your stack, basically. So the hourglass model is important for standardization because it enables a flexible but unified way to connect diverse technologies and stakeholders across the digital ecosystems. And like in this example, the CI ecosystem. It is at the core of the hourglass, the platform and integrators act as standardized interfaces, allowing varied infrastructure provisions to interact efficiently with a dynamic set of application and solution developers. If you can go to the next slide, please. So in addition to this model that can be used and replicated and that we used for all of the pilot and the use cases, CI Sphere, we worked with the large-scale pilot to identify in which markets each of the use cases were. We've done this work of clustering each of the use cases or scenarios of the pilots in different spheres, right, in different domains. So we ended up having three main domain, one around energy and infrastructure resilience, one around mobility, logistics, and the software-defined vehicle, and the last one more around like industrial optimization and productivity. The idea by clustering them is to foster collaboration for all of the representatives of the large-scale pilot to discuss common challenges and synergies and obstacles, and to find and to connect them as well with industry leaders and experts that could provide them with some of the insight outside of their pilots. So basically having some market realities along with their projects. This market-driven approach, as I was saying, fosters like synergies, speeds up knowledge exchange, and accelerate the transition from innovation to a large-scale adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agathe. I think that this, let's say, it's a nice continuation of what we heard from the previous speakers, because it has the, let's say, continuation to what Svet was mentioning as a part of the European approach policies and how basically CI domain is in a way developed in Europe through, among other things, this initiative. And I think it's a good leeway for the two projects that now are coming and that are related to CI Sphere, and that's OCI. And I hope that Ignacio is here with us so that he can present OCI project and actually what is actually expected outcome there, and also what would be the possible link also to standardization, because as you can see, it's a quite big and interesting project. So I think there could be some outcomes there. So Ignacio, floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Damir. Thank you very much, Agathe, for your presentation, and good afternoon, everybody here in the audience. Yes, indeed. I will try to skim slightly through what is this project, this large-scale pilots project, that it's called OCI, and that I, with my team, we do coordinate. It's an innovation action funded under the Cluster 4 of the European Commission Horizon Europe program, in particular responding to the topic Data 0103 from last year about piloting emerging smart IoT platforms and decentralized intelligence. This is a large project that will receive around 25 million euros and will span all the year 2025. We started at the beginning, 2025, until June 2028. So it's, it's a long term, but we have ambitious goals since the very beginning, and we hope to have clear and actionable entry points with regards to standardization, which is the relevant topic for today. This side, we believe we have a lot of potential as a project for being an active part of the standardization community because of our geographical diversity nature. As you can appreciate in the slide, we have a total of 56 partners from 19 countries that are working in cloud technologies, edge technologies, IoT technologies, putting all them together at the service of validation and demonstration of these platforms in a unified manner and trying to follow clear paths that have been inherited from previous actions. Indeed, this is important for us for what our relevant outcomes can be, since many of the partners of our consortium have already participated actively, not only in previous research projects, but also in relevant standardization activities, and I will mention some. As you can see in this map, there are a series of pilots scattered across the continent, which have a thing in common. All of them touch upon different application verticals, such as urban management, such as electromobility, such as maritime ports or agriculture, or software-defined vehicle in automotion, but all of them have in common the compelling need for taking advantage of distributed computing and intelligence, Cloud-Edge-IoT, to improve their usage, provision, demand, or production of energy. So we have this matter as a, let's say, conductive thread of all the demonstrations, but all of them have different purposes in different sectors, which of course aligns pretty well with the idea of what can drive standards in terms of funneling from different relevant actors, converging into a way of addressing a common problem or commonalities through the technology. So to our understanding, the potentialities in standardization are big. As a matter of fact, in the next slide, you can see that out of the 6 key exploitable expected results of our project, the contribution to pre-normative take a relevant role. We plan to deliver a data sharing platform, some ontologies on how to handle data related to distributed computing and energy, a federated catalog of deployable apps, a marketplace that can be adopted in different sectors to be exploited and deployed to achieve more intelligence, more security, more dynamism, and better latency, better characteristics in all these networks and in all these aspects related to innovation in energy. But we realize that it's paramount for us to at least try to contribute to ongoing pre-normatives, because of course we are aware that the standardization processes usually span longer than a project duration. So it would be a bit naive from our side to just, declare that we are pursuing actual standards out of the blue. Instead, what we will do is we will be engaged with different standardization entities that we are already participating, the different partners of this big consortium, as contributors or even as leaders, and to try to depict and convey our messages of unification, ways of deployment, structuration of the deployments, building blocks of architecture, and other elements that we have already identified that can be channeled or inserted in these ongoing initiatives. So this is some part of what we can or think we can provide. And if we move to the next slide, Damir, can appreciate that it's not only the potentiality at a functional level or at different domains converging to a single problem level, but also potentiality in terms of scale. For a big project with 6 key strategic verticals, agriculture, maritime ports, automobility, network telco operators, urban management, And with this, we're going to, in these 42 months, deploy, test, document, and showcase 8 large-scale pilots in terms of users, in terms of potential business models, potential added business value, potential influence in prosumers, communities, energy communities, engagement with the society, which are particularized in 28 real-world scenarios, solving very specific real-world issues. So, to put it in a few words, we believe that having this scale and this variety converging into a common problems with common solutions can pave the way for contributing to standardization initiatives. Here you can find a QR code we have deemed convenient to include that directly points out you to an ongoing process that we are hosting as a project, a cascade funding process. We have reserved out of the budget a total of 4 million euros for financial support to third parties in materializing 2 open calls. One of them, the first one, is already ongoing. The process is open. So we call along you all to come along, and if you are SMEs or have interested SMEs that work in cloud, edge, IoT, in different verticals related with energy issues or solving any kind of potential challenge that may appear, to come along and submit. And we have included this for a very timely coincidence, but also because from our past experiences, open calls in this type of projects usually act as early adopters that can help magnificently to improve our results, improve the results of the project, with the idea specifically and directly to contribute to standards. And this is already validated. You got feedback from real users from the exterior, so you are not just biased from your own beliefs. And this is a good boost for providing or advancing towards contributing to standards. Also, with this in mind, and in the next slide, Damir, we can find that drawing from the exercise that Agath has previously outlined, we're already making use of the hourglass model. That is a very useful tool to streamline how our different technological tools are mapping different needs of actors in a value chain, in our case of the convergence between digital and energy worlds, how the different actors such as DSOs, hardware manufacturers, data providers, infrastructure providers, digital service experts, creators of energy, creators and maintainers or energy management systems, or just appliances, commodities, and stakeholders can leverage from the interconnection, from the synergies created in the creation of different paths here through this hourglass, this clepsydra schema, where our different tools such as the representation, the orchestration capacity, our platform delivered, the demonstration in pilots, the blueprints, the utilities, and this catalog of apps I mentioned can help them in a way and can create not only documentation, but also support, evidence, success stories that can inspire in the way that at least a P standard inspires or leads the way for adoption in multiple sectors. And this scales, because for us, this is our field of interest, but it can clearly be uptaken or upscaled for other type of sectors. Here, what we have done is what we can try to push towards EU, but possibly beyond EU, now that we are in the EU-Canada Exchange Week, with these specific components and guidelines, how, thanks to the already in place participation of our partners in monitoring, networking with different industrial entities, and participation in standard development already, such as edition, co-edition, leading, working group participation or contribution, So thanks to our permeation in this fora, we will be able to transfer these ideas following this scheme of our glass model with all the experience we will be gaining, so that we could be in a good position to actually influence standards. That's our idea. Not just for the sake of doing that, but based on the experience we will be gaining through these years of execution. And here you can find a list, just to conclude my presentation. You can find a small list with the standards in which we are already, or our partners are already, bringing concepts emanating from our actions, such as JTC1 from ISO IEC, TC204, ETSI, the European standardization entity, like 1M2M, SAREF, TC data, E2T, SD20, among others. The list is huge. And hopefully, and thanks to our technological deployments, validation in real scenarios, and the upscale potential, making use of these tools, we will be able to be, valid and valuable for the standardization community. This is what our beliefs from OCI are, and thanks, Damir, for having us presenting today. Thanks, everybody, and we are here for any further comment or question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio, very much. I think it's very interesting. It also, I would say, flows very nicely from what Agat gave as an introduction. And I think that this link with the pre-normative standardization and also, I would say, practical applications of the solution is very important. I think we may slightly reshuffle the schedule. No, go back. That's next. We still have two presentation. Since I don't see the representative of the co-pilot, I think we can continue maybe with Curtis. I don't know if you have slides.
There you go. Yeah, I don't have any slides. I was just going to sort of share my perspective on some of the work that we've been doing on standards. So just maybe for some background for everybody on the call, I run a company called MayaVision Technologies, and what MayaVision does is we help cities to basically to understand and optimize traffic flow through urban intersection networks. So if you've ever sort of driven around an intersection network and you're waiting at a red light, wondering why the heck that is, hopefully that's an intersection where we are not deployed. We sell our products all over the world. I think last count we're in about 65 countries all over the world. And our buyer is often, if not universally, a public agency. So sometimes we would sell through local distribution or implementation channels, but ultimately the buyer is public agencies. And as you can imagine, the public agency never wants to be locked into a single vendor. So standards are a big part of our procurement. And intersections, to maybe give you a bit of a sort of a deep dive into the intersection world. Intersections are for the most part built around standards that are 40 or 50 years old. Red, yellow, green at an intersection is essentially light switches being flipped on and off. So there's a 120 volt AC power line, or three of them, I guess, if you think about red, yellow, and green, that run from an electrical cabinet out to the intersection. And then there's some control logic that literally just flips light switches on and off to create the traffic light timing that we experience as we drive around. And so our view is that there's a need. We're in the 21st century. It's 2025. There's a need to modernize the intersection and make it more of a digital system. This would allow us to do to more easily deploy congestion mitigation strategies, traffic safety improvement strategies. But because the procurement regimes are anchored in these existing standards that were developed 40 or 50 years ago, there's not a lot of opportunity for true innovation to come in. So when MayaVision sells, I like to tell my 10 and 11-year-old that I make time machines, because we sell a digital 21st century approach that sits on top of a very antiquated 40-year-old electrical standard. So we've been doing some work in Canada to with the civic governance group to essentially define what we think is a 21st century approach to intersection control. It's an IP-based standard using their open process, that invites stakeholders, other companies, other municipalities in to basically take a look at how do we create an equivalently functionally safe intersection, because ultimately that's a big part of this is how do we make sure that, if anyone's ever seen the Italian Job, how do we make sure that never happens? We don't want all the lights turning green, which is a big part of the current standards. How do we do that in a digital paradigm? But then how do we enable this sort of future where we can take advantage of all the benefits of digitization? So we've been going through that process, trying to create a Canadian standard, and then our hope and our intention would be to work at the ISO level to sort of take that standard and try to make it more universally applicable outside of Canada. Once that standard exists, then a whole ecosystem of vendors can emerge around it, and modernize traffic networks globally on top of that standard, because the procurements can now sort of point at an independent third party, internationally recognized standard for what the intersection of tomorrow might look like. So this is our first foray into standards. We've been around for 20 years building IP and products around it, but this is sort of the first foray into standards. But we're very excited about what this process will lead to, and in terms of being able to accelerate innovation in the industry that we participate in. So yeah, that's our experience with standards. Like I said, very excited to be going through this process, and we think it's something that could be really transformational for all of our driving experiences. Which the one thing I always say is, like, human beings, I've traveled and sold all over the world, and everywhere we go, human beings have different histories and different cultures. The one thing we all have in common is our dislike of waiting in traffic. So we're looking forward to getting the standard done and making a change in that shared experience we all have.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting example in the sense that, like you said at the end, I think everyone can very easily identify with the example, but it doesn't mean it's that it's less important, because, like you said, it's also a safety thing. So it needs to work, needs to be reliable. Sorry, really, human lives can depend on the system. And like you said, if this is something that could be and should be brought into the 21st century, then it's a time to think about. And I think this is the type of the practical things, and that I think is very important to have in mind in all over the work, because some of the examples we heard before sound a bit more high level. Of course, if there would be more time, people would see also practical value of all the pilots and everything, because we didn't have time to explain what they are doing. They're also doing very practical, I would say, life important things, especially in the cities. But the thing is, of course, how to get there. And I think this could be one potential topic of further, let's say, discussion and collaboration between EU and Canada. And I think we need maybe a bit more of such, I would say, real life examples that everyone can almost immediately, I would say, understand and kind of identify with.
I just
yes, please go ahead.
Damir, I just posted the link to the Digital Governance Council's sort of call for this particular. If there's anyone on the call that's got an interest in participating, we're obviously looking to grow the tent around this. And I think just maybe just close, like, there's lots of standards that have been developed around what is called V2X, like vehicle to everything. The automotive department, like 5GAA and sort of automotive sector, has really pushed for that. But what's missing right now is you have this emerging sort of digital car, and this desire for the digital car to be able to talk to the digital infrastructure. But the infrastructure itself is not digital. It's a very analog and sort of serial port. All the data is trapped in a metal box on the side of the road. So we think that this work is very complementary to the work that's been going on in groups like 5GAA around sort of digitization of the vehicle network, and critical to get to ultimately to get to like a level 5 autonomy future. So, but yeah, really appreciate the time today, and if there's anybody on the call that's interested, reach out either to myself or to Keith, and I'm sure we'd be happy to have folks involved.
Thank you very much. I think this also point that you made with the link with the, let's say, digitalized cars, let's put it like this, which are already partially, let's say, on the road. It's very important, and I know that in OCI in particular, there are a couple of use cases that are actually linked to the V2G and to the vehicles, which I think is also interesting. And I see a lot of kind of links between what we said today. Okay, let's maybe move on to Marva, who is also with us from Iristel. Marva, please, you can.
Hi, everyone. Good
start your
morning and good
presentation.
afternoon,
Thank you.
depending where you are in the world. As Damir kindly mentioned, I am here representing IRISTEL, which is a telecommunications company in Canada that is also a competitive local exchange carrier offering a variety of different solutions to both businesses and also for residential use in the telecom space here and all over the world, actually. But really, to understand the kinds of interventions that IRISTEL offers or does, I want to sort of orient its services and the social questions that we have been talking about so far. So IRISTEL and much of the history of IRISTEL is very much so concerned with how digital terrains are being recontoured given a specific moment in time, and how the recontouring of these various digital terrains are hinged on issues of sovereignty, autonomy, and democracy. And in doing so, and in thinking about this, it's been able to develop different technologies that are going to move us from Web 2 space, which is very much so centralized, siloed, digital infrastructure that leads to issues of weak identity assurance, poor interoperability, and vulnerabilities in routing that inevitably can cause BGP hijacking and DNS spoofing, and moves us into or transcends us into the Web3 space. And it does this through its investment in two different kinds of technologies, one of which is Scion, developed out of Zurich in 2009. And it stands for Scalability, Control, Isolation on Next Generation Networks. And it enables one to have precise control over data flows. So ultimately what this means, it gives the user control over their various data paths and works against traditional routing models. And these routes are done so cryptographically through the KNS system, which is the carrier number system. And it takes a traditional phone number and transforms it into a secure, decentralized digital ID that has the capacity to perform and do multiple things, ranging outside of the traditional use of a phone number. Now, why this is incredibly important to the work of IRISTEL is because historically, especially as my fellow Canadians might note, in Canada, we've often had incredibly centralized broadband solutions across this country, and it has resulted in poor digital infrastructure and access to digital identity and digital autonomy across our nation. But this particular intervention, or the combination of these interventions, enables one to have a more democratically accessible digital identity. And I note, I'm trying to be cognizant of time here, Damir. I know that we said there was 8 minutes, a maximum of 8 minutes, but I think I might actually end there and leave more of an open-ended arena for discussion, maybe.
Thank you very much. I think you were all, I would say, more or less on time. It's all good. I think we still have some time. I still don't see the last speaker. Maybe in the meantime, since we still have, we are, let's say, good on the schedule. We have about 8 minutes before the next part. Maybe the time would be for the audience, if they have any questions for the speakers, having in mind that we have quite a lot of interventions until now. And like I said, there is quite a lot of important things that were mentioned from Svet, from the, let's say, policy side. Keith mentioned a lot of things like so Svet was mentioning, like, dependency, sovereignty, competitiveness. Then we have, always the question how standards can help, because what I think is very important is to understand the standards are not something in itself. They are the tool to help to reach certain, let's say, objectives, and then to avoid fragmentation, how to deal with the governance, interoperability, and then, of course, the question, as always, is practical things, practical examples that we heard from Curtis and Marwa. Is there any question from the audience? Okay, so Emilio has a question. So general question to all speakers, where do they see opportunities of cooperation between EU and Canada stakeholders? That, I think, is one of the key things for today. So, of course, we heard a lot of policy perspectives, a lot of developments, a lot of practical examples. And that always gives, like Emilio mentioned, okay, now what's next? Is any one of the speakers who wants to pick up? I think, Ignacio, if I may, you started to talk something about that. So maybe if you can start, and then I would maybe ask Curtis as well how he would see potential collaboration, because he has a very, very concrete example. And he
Excuse me, what are you trying for me to answer about how they can collaborate with us in terms of standardization?
I would say in any way, standardization, ultimately standardization is sort of the outcome. For example, you mentioned open calls. So I don't know, maybe it's legally not possible for Canadian SMEs to participate, or maybe it is, I have no idea. But
okay, yes, I will speak a bit. Yes,
yeah, but
I think that our
things like this.
Yeah, good, yes. Our collaboration now should be, I think, merely channeled through potential mutual interest in sharing what our results and our advances are, because with regards to what you mentioned about financial support to third parties and open calls, unfortunately, we are not able to accept submissions from entities beyond the EU members, the EU 27. This is according to the rules that were signed in the grant agreement from the European Commission, so there is nothing we can do about it. But we are always happy and keen to establish potential discussion synergies on interesting things, on interesting developments, on as well. You will all be, invited to follow along our social media channels, in which we are regularly posting our progresses, our meetings, our findings, publications, but also actual material results and any other progress we are doing. Also through INSTAR, of course, in which we are very active with Amir and the rest of organizers. We contribute to the different task forces in which we are planning to contribute in terms of documentation, white papers, common interests, synergy points. This, for me, would be the main streamlined channels for establishing this cooperation at the time being. Later, once our project will be more mature, we have the commitment with the European Commission to make our solution open source and open to to potential external adopters. So based on the experience of different industrial partners coming from different sectors in our project, maybe you could find some interesting connections, and we could set up potential technological tests or support in this regard if there is mutual interest. These are the communication channels I can foresee, but of course always open to other potential collaborations if they appear.
Okay, there is another question for you. Just try to as quickly as possible reply, because then I want to give the floor to Curtis and then maybe others if they want to comment. So what is meant by the cross-domain continuum ontology in the realm of decentralized intelligence?
Decentralized intelligence, what do you refer to, excuse me?
So that's the question.
Is there in the chat? Excuse me.
So you can hear.
What is meant by a cross-domain continuum ontology in the decentralized intelligence? Yeah. Okay, good. Yes, this means that emanating from previous projects, and we are going to perfection it here in OCI, we have delivered a common way of representing distributed computing elements and their attributes and characteristics, their functionalities, how they expose themselves, etc., in a sort of a data model with some metadata explicitly defined, with some API for accessing to this information, so that every of these nodes participating in a distributed environment of computing continuum, so-called, you are able to inspect their their nature, their current status, how they are performing in a continuum. You can imagine it if you come from the net telecommunications technical world, a sort of distributed SMIB way of expressing the capacities of a distributed element in the computing continuum, which we found was something that was not done before, as strange as it may seem. So that's why we refer to that.
Thank you. And then Curtis, back to you. There is also one question for you. For the V2X future, will we have standards come from the automotive towards the energy or vice versa?
Oh, this is a very, very good question. I will answer shortly. I know it's for Curtis. I just want to say one thing, Damir, sorry.
Yeah.
I am not sure. What I know by a fact is that there are a lot of movements also promoted by European Commission trying to push this forward in terms of vehicle to X and vehicle to grids, V2G. And as a matter of fact, you are all hereby invited to a great workshop, a large workshop we're going to organize in Brussels on November 20th on behalf of OCI. It's called V2G Leaders Event, where we will put together experts from the OEM automotive sector and also from the EV chargers and the electric sector, together with different European Commission officials, where I am sure these aspects about standardization will be touched upon. So you are invited to attend. Thanks, and Curtis, this question is for you.
Thanks. I think, not sure if you can put maybe in the chat also the link to
it's
the
already
event.
done. I did it
okay.
as I was talking. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the thing is then, of course, then maybe you can get in touch with Curtis to discuss if maybe he can also contribute to the event. Just one open idea.
That's great.
It's yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff's been covered here, but maybe just talk about the opportunity for partnership. Like, anytime you invest in product development, like building a product for a market, obviously the bigger the market is, the better for the company making the investment, but also for the customer, the more participants in that market, the better the competition and the better price and better like service quality you're going to get. And so in my industry, there's a lot of regional fragmentation in the standards, right? So within the US, there's multiple standards, and in Europe, there's, I would say, even more, over a dozen different standards. And so you get sort of regional competition unless you have a company that's willing to invest in multiple standards to support. So one of the things that we think is a real opportunity with this digital standard is that, if we sort of take these regional standards that have all developed through various electrical standardization bodies, and if we can build a 21st century digital standard, the more alignment we can have between Canada, Europe, and then beyond, the bigger that market will be, the more attractive it'll be for companies like MyOvision to want to invest in that market, but then also the better outcomes you're going to get for cities, because there's going to be lots more companies that are wanting to invest in it. So we're really hopeful that with the process that we're going through with Keith's group, and then with the prospect of that, being able to graduate to ISO through partnerships with folks like this group, that market will be bigger, and ultimately if I go back to my earlier point about the real purpose of what MyOvision does is to try to make traffic suck less, and the bigger the market, the more everyone can invest, and the more we can accomplish that goal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There was another last question. I'm not sure that this is, let's say, maybe for private side, so to say, speakers, but I don't know, maybe Svet can get back to that in the sense of the potential partnership within EU-Canada Horizon Europe program. I think, Svet, you already touched upon this in your presentation, but I don't know if you maybe want to add something, but Svet is not with us.
On which of the...
So on the EU-Canada, so Canadian participation in Horizon Europe, I think that was the question.
Yeah, I mean, usually when foreign partners, the other countries participate in this, it's a bilateral agreement between the EU and then the other country. So when the project is common, the call is made for both sides for the project, but then each of the two sides is funding their participation. So in this respect, okay, it depends also on the Canadian state. We have to agree with them. And of course, this is not done on a per project basis. I mean, there has to be an agreement that this is possible, a framework that this is possible and funded. And again, this exists, with, as I said, for South Korea, for Japan, etc., for other countries. So it should be possible to arrange this kind of things. Now we have it with the UK as well, in a way, as you know. Of course, it's even bigger than these other countries, and so on. So the framework is there. It just has to be put in place for Canada, but for this, EU and Canada have to sit together and discuss, but not necessarily on my level, but on the level of the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Sven. I think Paul is also responding to this, saying that his understanding is Canada is associated to Pillar 2 Collaborative RNI Horizon Europe in last year. So I think that is also, I would say, good development in that sense. And of course, then we will see how this will develop, and then also in the next framework program as well. So thank you all for this first part. I think it was very interesting. And thank you also for the questions from the audience. Now we are going to the last part of the program, so with a panel about cross-border interoperability and then concrete steps towards open CI standards. You can see the speakers on the screen. So you already heard from Keith and Dario, and now we have Cecile and Antonio. I would maybe invite Cecile and Antonio to start with you because you didn't speak before, and then we will have an open panel with Keith, Dario, and hopefully we will have some questions from the audience as well. So Cecile, Antonio, I don't know how you structure it, but floor is yours.
Hi,
Thank you.
hello everybody. Thank you, Damir. I was going to ask about the slides, but they are here, so it's perfect. So I will start. So as you heard already a lot about the OCI project with Nacho in the previous discussion, I will not remind you about the objectives of the project. We just want to deep dive into the standardization strategy of the OCI project, and that's why I showed the standardization landscape. So at the beginning of the OCI project, we analyzed all the topics and all the subjects the OCI partner will have to comply to, and between them there is EU regulations and certification schemes, as well as international standards, as you all know. And at the end of this analysis, we demonstrated that to maximize its impact, the OCI project needs to have a global strategy, and in particular to take into account the necessary alignment of standardization efforts between different standardization organizations, as well as the current project of the EU regulation initiatives, which also impact the standardization. And that's why here we are showing some of the activities of the project, and we try to relate them to the topics of today's session, which are interoperability, security, connectivity, and trust. And also, as you can see, we organize them around the hourglass model that has been defined by CES Fair, and that has been already presented very well by Agathe, also in the previous talk. So in the OCI project, as Ignacio was saying, the members were already involved in all of these committees, and this is just a smaller subset, but that's the best way to continue working together, for instance, on semantic interoperability and data spaces. So as mentioned already, by contributing to ETSRF, TC data, but also IEC TC57 and TC13, as well as ISO IEC GTC1 and SC38 and SC41. So I will not list them all, but as you can see, we are diving into different topics, also on minimum interoperability mechanisms, as it has already been mentioned at the start of this session, information models, especially in the domain of energy with a SIM, architecture of IoT Edge Cloud with these different committees, and especially the EU CI Task Force 3, machine-to-machine and IoT, as has already been mentioned, with the HC1M2M and data management. In terms of security, because interoperability cannot be without security, Trialogue and the OCI project is involved in models for privacy initiative with the Eclipse Foundation, and project partners are also involved in this standardization committee from Sensenelec and ISO-ISC GTC1 on information security, cybersecurity, privacy protection, AI security, and privacy. On connectivity, we can notice the participation of project partners to the Internet Engineering Task Force. And on trust, different Sensenelec and ISO-ISC committees on AI trustworthiness, and also asset blueprint and deployment, especially in a relationship with the TM Forum, also ISO-ISC TC 251 and ISO-ISC GTC1 SA7. And I will let now Antonio comment more on this asset and blueprint and associated deployment, because that's one of the initiatives we want to present today.
Yeah. So if we can just leave this slide. This slide show one important thing is that interoperability is key for cross-domain. And in order to have it, you need to have connectivity, security, and trust. Okay. So I want to highlight the presentation made by Keith Johnson about governance, and everything he said is our concerns about how we are going to have governance and how we're going to have interoperability profiles. Okay, so we will just reuse Keith's slides for the future. Last week we had an event in Europe about what is so-called GRC Code of Conduct, which is dealing with cross-domain interoperability between energy smart appliances and the smart grid, and which is also dealing with the cross-domain interoperability between charging station, V2G, and the smart grid, okay? And everything that was presented by Keith is exactly our concerns. So my proposal would be that we work together and make this happen, make the governance and those things happen, okay? So if you get to the next slide. So the vision we have in OCI to make it happen is that on the left, we are creating building blocks of all sorts, okay? There could be software, there could be specifications. We leverage existing standards. You can see below SAREF 61850, the architecture standards from SC41, interoperability profiles. Actually, those standards are explaining how to build them. We still have to have them. So we still have to have the governance to have them, okay? So it's very rich. It's too rich, and it could be siloed. So we need to put them together into something we call a blueprint. A blueprint can depend on the pilot, on the solutions, but we don't want to have one blueprint per pilot. We want to have a blueprint which is reusing as much as possible, okay? So in order to do this, we need to help creating deployable assets, okay? And deployable assets is actually a combination of what we said, whether they are information models, building blocks, architectures, security features, interoperability profiles. And we have to have in such a way that once we have built it, it's consistent, it's trustworthy, and you can deploy it, okay? And again here, you have a number of standards. So TM Forum is providing standards about how you describe a product and you instantiate it on the internet. ISO 55000 is dealing with assets in general. So it could be a physical asset, okay, like a transformer in the smart grid, okay, or a smart meter, okay, or a charging station. And ISO 19770-X, okay, you have several, is dealing with IT asset management, okay? So we can see that we have lots of standards together, but we need to integrate so that we have the ability to deploy an asset, okay? Integration requires from us an understanding of all the dependencies, and most of all, management of versions and management of governance. And this is what we are trying to achieve. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I think it's a nice leeway to the open discussion. And also, it's good that you make already links to what Keith mentioned, because that was also one of the points. So there are already some, let's say, touch points going throughout the whole event, which is very important. And this could be potentials to the further dialogue and possibly collaboration. Let's maybe now continue with Keith, if you want to give a sort of, let's say, first response to what Antonio mentioned, and in general, of course, any, let's say, reflection on the interoperability as a topic, and then where could you possibly see collaboration between EU and Canada in this respect?
Thanks, Damir, and I do appreciate that our challenges and opportunities are quite similar and aligned, and I think there's certainly an opportunity on how standard development organizations in Canada are able to directly engage with European standardization organizations. So we certainly heard earlier in the opening remarks that Standards Council of Canada has a partner SDO agreement with Europe. Unfortunately, that agreement doesn't extend to the standard development organizations that are accredited in Canada that in fact develop the standards. So Standards Council of Canada, as much a peer globally, is not the organization mandated to develop national standards of Canada. That is the accredited standard development organizations that do that. So finding ways in which to extend those kinds of agreements to the standard developers directly in order to create for the collaboration and kind of joint realization around some of these interoperability needs, I think it would be quite prudent to establish those mechanisms. I'm certainly recognizing that Canada is not a member of the EU, but I think in many respects, the similar challenges and opportunities certainly present an opportunity to kind of rethink the very governance within organizations like CEN and CENELEC and ETSI to be able to provide those vehicles for direct collaboration with standard developers in Canada. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I took that note. I think this is important thing. Paul also mentioned one comment that I will also add because I think it's important for the discussion, that he said that, if there is any practical potential areas of collaboration, you already mentioned one, Keith, which would be, so it would be great, if you have any potential joint project idea, collaboration on concrete standards, we already heard one, to share basically, to share with us, and then we can take it from there and see what would be the best possible channel or way to continue discussion. And I think that was, of course, one of the idea for today. It's not just to hear a great number of examples, but basically to see, okay, what to do about this, right? Not just to talk about this. Antonio, before I will give floor to you, let's maybe just first hear the intervention from Dario, if Dario wants to add something to it, or let's say maybe because Keith also mentioned ETSI, how he sees maybe some potential of collaboration, or what would be the potential avenues for collaboration, if he can address this. Dario, can you hear us?
Yes, I was waiting for Keith if there is any comment or others. So yes, I can give my point of view, right? So when it comes to regional cross-border collaboration, we have to consider that actually interoperability is a more wider concept, practical, related to products and solutions. So in my point of view, since standardization that we do in ETSI-MEC, the group I'm chairing, it's globally applicable. For me, is really the target. So that actually, if we collaborate among different standardization bodies, and of course there can be local standards regionally, but they are coherent and also compatible. This is not a barrier for interoperability. So for me, actually, important aspect for the standard that I'm chairing in ETSI-MEC is that this is globally applicable. To give you an example, we have also collaboration with other, let's say, in the past, we had a collaboration with other national standard bodies, and we wanted to share the information about what's being available in one body and the other one. So that at least for product implementation, for the solutions implementation, there is no actually conflict and they are compatible. So for me, this is really the point for interoperability. And the starting point is that we are bringing globally applicable standard to the market.
Okay, thank you. Antonio, please go ahead.
Okay, so I listened to all of you, and I think there are two ways to look at the thing. Okay, one is a really high-level top-down policy-making approach. We have cross-domain, so we need to have practices that need to be embraced not only by us, but by SDOs. Okay, so we have cross-vertical aspects. So this is typically an SDO issue. Okay, how do we make it happen? Cross-domain the same. Cross-region is a bit more global, so this is what we do. And one of the approach people say is, first of all, smart standards, so something that allows us to put the things together in a more flexible way. But again, I'm going to say what Keith said, governance, okay? So the governance is absolutely important, and it needs to be embraced by the SDOs at the next level, which they do have governance, but they do not have the governance for cross-domain interoperability and profiles, okay? It's on ad hoc basis, so we still survive, we still have things, okay? But we are siloed, okay? And we do not have this mechanism that is smooth, and the negotiation between actually two committees of the same SDO could be very lengthy, not speaking about two SDOs, okay? So we have those issues. So already within one SDO, we have to solve it. And within cross SDO, we have to solve it, okay? This is a long-term stuff, and I'm pushing for that because we need to have this thing happen. And then we have the bottom up, okay? So say between EU and Canada, the best thing would be to find an example of undertaking with a reward where we are complementary and want to make it happen. And we survive in this, sorry to say, jungle of SDOs, okay, where we do the thing correctly and we try to show that we want to achieve something, okay? And we will have to cope with many issues, okay? And the issues about the fact that the top-down vision is not yet there, okay? But we still have to go ahead, and then by showing that we are doing it, maybe we'll create awareness within SDOs and cross SDOs that something has to be done, okay? And obviously there are lots of conflict of interest, okay? So, but we need to move on because now we are talking about complex ecosystems, and if we don't solve it, I think it's catastrophic, okay? So we need to solve it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any reaction to this from the panelists before I try to open the floor actually to the audience to ask questions, because I think you all made a good point.
I fully agree with Antonio. Another reflection is, as a chairman, I just want to make sure that is clear, something which is, in my opinion, already obvious, but maybe not to everybody. As a chairman, I have zero power on that. I can just support companies because we always say as a mantra, standardization is contribution driven. Standardization is contribution driven, contributions. Contributions are not like magic happening right out of the blue. They are coming from companies. And then I'm back to the initial point. Companies are bringing contributions to standards depending on their priority agenda. If this is driven by the need of interoperability, that's naturally, physiologically bringing to the ambition to push a global standard. If they are just a national ambition, then they will go naturally only to a smaller fora, to a smaller room, right? So actually, really, this should be driven by the need of interoperability. So as a chairman, I can only facilitate the collaboration, the information sharing among different markets or different organizations. But the actual contribution should come from companies. The problem is lack of awareness about this opportunity from companies. Sometimes there is no lack of wish, simply lack of the awareness of the possibility that they can have impact also and facilitate the interoperability. Actually, so our goal as a standard leaders, let's say, is to facilitate this information, like what we are doing also today in the webinar. So this is just my comment.
Thank you. I don't know, Kit, if you want to add something to what Antonio or Dario mentioned.
I like reflecting on the kind of interventions. Like what comes to mind for me is that standard developers, you know, facilitate participation to codify the standards themselves. And the layer that's missing is with respect to the adoption. So as we all well know, standards aren't neutral. It's those that are engaged in the process that effectively are influencing the marketplace rules, and there needs to be a layer of governance on top, and potentially collaboration between standard development organizations, not insofar as developing standards. Certainly we can identify joint work where it makes sense, like to what Curtis described earlier with respect to a standard in Canada that could very much be of mutual interest with other parts of the world. But I also think there's opportunity for a fora, and perhaps between Canada and the EU, in establishing the approaches for how to recognize and create for that interoperability between standards, that's kind of higher order of helping to support policymakers in respective jurisdictions on the application of these standards, so that it becomes much more cohesive, especially in the layers that we've discussed here today. So perhaps there's an opportunity, certainly as you know, with INSTAR and coordinating this kind of events, and with the various MOUs being signed across different jurisdictions, that potentially there's an opportunity to further extend or expand that scope into looking at those opportunities for the mutual recognition, looking for those opportunities for how to apply a set of governance such that these standards aren't simply pieces of paper, that they really can become integrated in an ecosystem that, I agree with everyone here, is quite siloed. And unfortunately, I think at times it's just by the way of which these organizations are governed that applies that kind of siloed approach. So as much as I appreciate, you know, chairing a technical committee within ISO and IEC, there's a role and responsibility, and that can only go so far. And I appreciate that for many chairs that are playing that function, they're playing a very pivotal function in standardization. But we can't have an entire reliance on those chairs to provide for this kind of collective benefit. So I think there's opportunity to engage across the policymakers within these respective organizations to kind of establish that collaborative arrangement.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions or comments from the audience related to the topic of collaboration, governance, interoperability? Okay, I see something Q&A. Could you reflect on the role of research organizations in standardization? Okay, because it seems that some research organizations were co-founding some committees, like in ETSI, for example, which worked well based on the researcher inputs as the initiator. Anyone wants to comment on this?
Well, I can start giving some
yes, please.
Let's say comments on my side. Well, just as an example, for example, from MEC, right? In our membership, I'm counting more than 200 among members and participants, and this is really a heterogeneous ecosystem. Also, industrial partners, big corporations, but small enterprises and startups, but also universities and research centers. I would say maybe 10 years ago was less common to have research institutions to bring standards. Now, actually, I see some of the smartest guys which are doing research with impactful input and contributions also to standardization, right? Maybe sometimes they are collaborating also together with other industrial players to make sure that what they push into the standard is actually corresponding to some impactful solution for a product to go into the market. In this case, I believe they are doing right. So maybe sometimes there are, in my visibility, what I see, there are sometimes some European projects funded in consortia, which are mixed among industrial and research players, working together on some solution. And maybe they decide together to have a standardization impact in a certain target SDO. And this is really, I will say, perfect, driven by genuine industrial need. And sometimes it's happening, and also more recently, I'm seeing as well, not just only standardization, but also input to open source projects, open source communities. And sometimes those open source projects, I can tell, for example, in Etsy also, there was a kind of new entity about open source projects, which is particularly inspired by standards. In these cases, also, this is very meaningful, I believe, for the industry. So research players are playing a good role also in the standardization as a wider sense. Sometimes I have a good feeling, I will say, they are paying more attention than years ago and more seriously working on that. Not just doing pure research, but also applied research with impactful standard contributions.
Thank you, Dario. I think that what Ignacio was saying, because he is coming from the university and leading this big project together with Antonio and other colleagues, I think you are right. And also what Svet mentioned, it's also part of the policy. So it's not like you just have a EU-funded project, which is, let's say, research or innovation, let's say, oriented, that comes just to do some sort of the research. It's basically something to be applicable. And then very often you have actually targets in a project that you have to, in a way, deliver also some, like Nacho mentioned, pre-normative at least inputs to standardization, which I think are very valuable.
Damir?
Yes.
In the chat, Paul mentioned that we could work together to find a joint project, thing like that. And Keith made a proposal to have a forum where we work how we can recognize interoperability together, okay? And I think the strength of this is, I think we are really like-minded partners, and we are going to the same directions. We can work on this and pick up maybe existing work that we do in both sides, put them together and show how we create create this governance, okay? I think this is important, and I want to put positive notes, because when I was saying, okay, standards have this problem A, B, and C, yes, there are problems, but we can move on and improve, okay? So I think there are two positive aspects that I have seen, okay? First of all, there's an initiative on data space, okay? And data space is fully interoperability driven, okay? So if and their standards, if those standards on data space work out well, we will have those things that will pop up, okay? Exactly along the directions of governance and things like that. And the current standards is already alluding to that, okay? And the second thing is that when you want to have an ecosystem that works, you put conformity assessments, trust labels, things like that. And if we have that, and if it is embraced by the standardization and then by the ecosystem, we have it, okay? So I want to be positive, and I think this could be the way to go. And my suggestion is to further discuss with our Canadian partners about what Keith proposed, okay? And maybe we can make it happen.
Thank you, Antonio. Since we are only a couple of minutes left, I would maybe invite you, Keith, to maybe reflect on what Antonio said, and then we can wrap up the session for today. Pete, can you hear us?
I think this is great. Let's get to work.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we are about to close today's session, or let's say to wrap it up. So first of all, I would like to thank all speakers and participants for active participation, great interventions. So like I mentioned already, we had, I would say, nice leeway from the introduction, from the, let's say, high level, from colleagues from the Commission and the Canadian side. And then this from Olivier and Iat, I think it was very important to hear, I would say, broader, let's call it umbrella approach and collaboration. And then we started with more, I would say, detailed, more concrete interventions from Svet, showing basically from what is coming out from the side of the European Commission, of the European Union, in the Cloud-Edge-IoT, not only standards, but from the policy domain, from projects, various initiatives, and then how this kind of sits together with standardization. And then we heard also from Keith, actually, what is the, let's say, approach from the Canadian side, from Dario, what are the activities from ETSI, because this all kind of gives a nice overview of what is happening. And then we heard from the projects how in certain domains developments can be, let's say, how activities can be developed, and how these outcomes can be in a way, let's call it standardized or put to work, including various building blocks and models that we heard later from Cecile and Antonio, be it Hourglass or other, let's say, models. And then in the last part, we heard about interoperability and how basically could be some potentials to collaborate, maybe on some concrete examples that we heard, like from Curtis, but definitely on interoperability. And I would say that the first thing would be, let's say, to continue the dialogue. Is it formal forum, less formal forum, with INSTAR or through other initiatives, to try to find, Antonio is also part of the INSTAR, so it's easier. And we already have open dialogue with Keith. So in that sense, I think we can continue this dialogue in this thing that we heard from today. Find some more maybe concrete topics and try to see how far we can go with that, with, let's say, common understanding from both sides, complementarity that Antonio mentioned, and then find one or two topics, start with that, and see how far we can go, and then present this as a maybe sort of the model for further discussion in maybe some other areas. Because of course today it's Cloud-Edge-IoT, tomorrow will be data, then quantum. So then we have to see what we can get out from the other topics as well. So thank you again for today. Thank you for your patience as well. It was a bit, let's say, lengthy, but I think it was worth it. And of course, you're invited to join us tomorrow for the data spaces and data topic.
Thank
So
you.
with
Bye-bye.
this, I don't know, Brendan, if you want to add something for the end or
No, I think just to say thank you very much to everyone for the discussions, and I think as you said, any ideas, building of course on what has already been agreed, but any other ideas for collaboration, please send them our way and we'll facilitate the agreements. And we'll see you tomorrow to talk about data.
Thank you all. Have a nice rest of the day and evening, depending where you are.